Hi there, and welcome to Be a Global Citizen, the podcast that explores the concept of global citizenship through the lens of value-creating education. My name is Scott Bauer, and I'm a SOCA researcher and educator. I hope you find the discussions, stories, and insights on this podcast to be valuable and inspiring as we strive to become global citizens who are committed to living a contributive life. Enjoy.
Hola, my name is Frank Arce. I'm based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Admissions and Financial Aid at the Harvard Graduate School of Education.
Hola, Frank. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. And I'm really excited that we have this opportunity to reconnect and for you to share more about your journey as an educator, as a school leader, as a university administrator, all of the things. And I really appreciate you because during my time at HGSE, you were incredibly supportive and just a really bright figure on campus and online to support students in making their educational journeys at Harvard possible. And I think that there's definitely this feeling of a calling that you bring to your work for all students. I would say, but in particular, right, minority students, and there's this kind of core aspect of why that diversity is so important. And I wanted to learn more about what brought you to the work and what really ignites your passion in education, serving students. So passing it back to you for you to share some of the milestones of your journey and any special influences and individuals in your life that brought you to a place like Harvard.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Scott. It's always a pleasure connecting with you. Um, yeah, I've been working in higher education now for a little over 20 plus years. I'm passionate about college access and college success. So I think as administrators, as educational leaders, we talk a lot about college access, but it's really important to also have the infrastructure, the tools to make sure students are successful and thrive throughout their academic journey. So I always say college access and success. I started my career, actually, I would say in my undergraduate work. I attended the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, and I needed to find employment. I needed to work. Unfortunately, I did not have the financial means to have the luxury of not working. And so I applied for federal work study, and I was placed in the financial aid office. And it was in the financial aid office that I realized you can have a career in higher education. I did not know that you can have a career in higher education. And I worked in different admissions, financial aid, student services offices from throughout my 4 years in my undergrad and just fell in love with it. So when it was time to graduate, I earned my degree in finance, but really felt like my passion was in college and university work. And that's where I started my career. And it was really meaningful because as I was thinking about my process of going through higher education, navigating that space, unfortunately, I'm first generation. My mom did a lot of great work, but I just didn't have the resources of knowing how to navigate that landscape. And so that really kind of ignited a fire in me as well to think about this work and how I want to make sure that others have access in a way that's meaningful and that they're really looking at all of their options as they're making a very important decision. Because we know a college education is vital for not only intellectual growth, but I'm also thinking about social mobility, for career mobility. And also, I'm a very strong believer that education overall is a public good. It's a human right. It's a human right. And so, yeah, that's my journey into higher education. As I kept on leaning more into the field, I started taking on more responsibilities, started learning more about the different aspects of the student life cycle. And with that, I started taking on more leadership positions. I'm Chicago. I was born and raised in Chicago. That's where I started my career. And then I had the privilege of going to New York City to work for Columbia University, overseeing their financial aid infrastructure. During that time, I knew that I wanted to also continue to advance my skill sets. So I decided to pursue my doctorate at NYU, and I focused on leadership and innovation. My work specifically focused on financial wellness and literacy in the post-secondary space. And after I finished my doctorate, it was an amazing opportunity at the Harvard Graduate School of Education to join the financial aid team. And through that work, I then had the privilege to oversee admissions. And that's where I'm at now and just loving the work. HGSE is doing amazing work in the field of education, just like you, Scott, the work that you're doing. And our motto is learn to change the world. And I'm just excited that I have the privilege to help move that work forward.
Awesome. I didn't know that you were from Chicago. So I frequently go to Chicago and love the city and so many wonderful, incredible people there. And I kind of wanted to focus our attention a little bit more on that early part of your career, since it sounds like, you came in with this understanding of, I'm going to get a degree in finance, and yet you left with a very different pathway that you were very excited to pursue. And I'm just curious, like, you said that you had this opportunity and you just took a job in the financial aid office, and then exposed to all of these different processes and interacting with many students, probably, as well as the administrators there. But at what point did it click for you? What made it so like exciting and special for you? Could you maybe like kind of put the microscope to that? I'd be curious to know what that was for you.
Definitely, definitely. So, I was super excited to be studying finance at UIUC. But when I started doing financial aid work, so working in the financial aid office as a federal work study student, um, I was, I was, I was being taught the entire financial aid process from A through Z. And I did not realize how complex it is. There's federal oversight, there's institutional oversight. And as I was learning all aspects of like, we usually we think about the financial aid application for domestic students. We think about the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. But then what are the things that happen after an individual completes the FAFSA? And that's where I was learning. I was learning the complexities around that form, the formulas that are involved in making these financial aid decisions. We understand that financial aid is crucial for a lot of individuals to decide what institution they're going to attend. So learning all of like the secret sauce was so exciting that I was like, wow, this is a lot more complicated than I thought. I thought it was like originally when I'm being a young adult, fill out the FAFSA, even though the FAFSA was very complex itself, but filling it out, submitting it, and then you'll get some information back. You'll get some financial aid. I didn't realize how many additional steps. And sometimes that's a little controversial because I think specifically for federal financial aid in the United States, I think that we've made it quite complex. We made the system quite complex, which can sometimes be a barrier for folks to even try to pursue financial aid for higher education. But going back to my experience at UIUC, learning all those steps, I found it to be exciting. And then I was like, wow, I didn't realize folks were actually dedicating their careers to this type of work. The directors of financial aid across the country are doing some amazing work. So it's a high pressure position. It's a high pressure office, especially it's with all the regulations and also trying to meet the institutional goals and we understand that a lot of funding is finite. There's not a lot of institutions don't have unlimited funding. So how do you strategically uh, think about the funding that you have, the mission of the institution, and trying to make sure that you are recruiting a cohort of individuals that are passionate about not only the work that they're going to be doing, but the impact that they're going to have later on. And when you put all that together, yeah, I can say it's a little stressful, but it's also very exciting.
And so important, right? I think what you were talking about in terms of the decisions that these students and their families have to make, right? It comes down to cost, and I think that there's a certain extent that families are willing to like invest in that education, and thereby take out student loans, and find ways to make it work. But I think what we've seen more and more, right, the trend being that the expense is quite daunting. So I think it's really wonderful to hear from someone who works within the financial aid office and who has such breadth of experience in that area, to know that like there's really capable educators and like school leaders that are kind of really racking their brains to understand not only the processes but how to keep those families like front of mind, because those are the families that they're serving, and they're really trying to open up that access. And so for you to like understand the importance of financial aid, it kind of seemed like you were the student worker and you were, taking a look under the hood, right, initially, and you were just like amazed at this process. But you said that, previously you just kind of thought of like FAFSA and maybe a few other things, and that was it. Um, could you share, like, when you were applying to the University of Illinois, like, what was your understanding of financial aid, and like, was that a big, component of you making your decision for college, like from a personal sense? Because you also said that, you're first gen, and you also, didn't have quite the same extent of resources or understanding of how to apply for colleges. So can you maybe share from the personal side, like, what was it like for you?
Yes, great question. It was scary. It was daunting. I knew that I wanted to attend college. I knew that that was definitely going to be in my story. I knew that I wanted to be the first in my family to go to college, and I had the privilege of going to a great high school in Chicago, Illinois, Lane Tech, shout out. And but when it was time to navigate the financial aid process, it was very confusing. And unfortunately, I did not have the access to go to my mom or members of my family to walk me through that process. So I had to proactively identify other folks. And at that point, I did not really have mentors, and I'm a big advocate of mentorship. I think it's huge. So I had to try to spend some time with my admissions counselor for the school. Got a little bit of information, but part of it was me trying to proactively reach out to different organizations that I know that were doing, and that was me taking a proactive step to try to do that. And that's why when I do my work right now, I know a lot of folks that really want to pursue higher education, but just don't have that roadmap and might not even know where to start. So I think that's where a lot of work still needs to happen. And just when I think about just college affordability and indebtedness, you mentioned, Scott, as you were talking about the cost and the like how it's such a big factor for students and families to make an informed decision. Um, College costs has skyrocketed. We know that. Tuition has gone up and up every year. Funding, financial aid has either stayed stable or actually declined. And when we think about financial aid, not only from a domestic aspect, but from an international aspect as well, because I'm thinking about like HGSE, for example, when we our motto is learn to change the world. So we want our international scholars in the classroom. They add value to the classroom, to the conversation. But we know that even then, that's another layer. The cost adds a whole nother layer for our international scholars to be able to access HGSE. So, and I see that as well when I talk to peers at other colleges and universities, be that undergraduate and graduate space. So, so back to my personal side is just not having that roadmap, not having those peers really, really impacted where I ended up at. So luckily, I was able to complete the FAFSA. UIUC proactively reached out to students in the Chicagoland area. So by that proactive outreach, that was what got me connected with them, and then I realized that this is what I wanted to do. But now, when I if I would say I graduated in 2003. So if I look at it 23 years later, um, I love U of I. Formative years, transformative, really set my career, that I probably would have not have picked that institution. I didn't know that these other institutions were an opportunity. And it's because being first generation, I just didn't have that knowledge. And now I look at it like I could have applied to a number of I could have probably applied to Harvard College, but it was just never part of my story. But I mean, I don't regret it. I loved UIUC, great experience, but and it it was where I was able to find my passion in working in higher education.
Yeah, well, I mean, being able to find one's passion, I think, is, priceless. I mean, so
Yes.
many people go about pursuing dead ends or kind of working in jobs that feel like a dead end itself. And I think that there's no coincidence in the path that you took. But I mean, yeah, I find it very interesting when we look back in hindsight that the kind of version of ourselves, and then also the, immediate environment that we found ourselves, might have in some ways like not afforded that broader vista that maybe we're able to appreciate now. And then I also just wanted to say that, I mean, like, rather than study at Harvard College, like, what better way than to be an administrator at Harvard itself, right? Because I think that level of impact is very big, right? Considering, there's a difference between the student experience and then you're working at the institution itself.
No, I agree with you 100%. Now, being able to work in the space now, I can lean into my experience, even though I know it's over two decades ago, but still I lean into that experience, which I think still resonates with a lot of folks when I'm in the field talking to students and family, and then thinking about our admissions process, thinking about our current policies, and how do we make sure that we are being intentional with our recruitment, intentional with our
Mhm.
engagement to make sure that we have a diverse and vibrant community. And I lean into that. I'm very passionate about HGSE having a diverse and vibrant community. That is, so a lot of times folks think about race and ethnic identity. That's an important component, but I'm also thinking socioeconomic. I'm thinking geographic. It's really domestic, international students. It's having all of these individuals that just make the environment richer and the conversations richer.
Undoubtedly, I 100% agree with that, and I really appreciate the way with which you're speaking about your role as an administrator at Harvard. You lean in to those lived experiences that you had yourself, and you're really making it clear when you meet with students, whether it's the first email that you connect with them over, or it's the first in-person meeting that you have, but you try to have them like understand that financial aid, it's yes, it is about the numbers, right? That's very important, but it's also like these human to human connections, right? And this understanding that you know from your role from like financial aid, but then also all of the other different departments on campus, it's really to orient yourself towards serving students and helping them grow, right, thrive during their time at Harvard, and then set themselves up, these students up for even more success to make good on that motto of learning to change the world, right, where they do in fact change the world, right? And I think that's really powerful. And I wanted to hear maybe a little bit more on that topic of the importance of diversity on campus and how that sets the conditions for people to learn even more, grow together. But you kind of touched on it already in terms of like the different aspects of diversity. But yeah, could you maybe speak a little bit more about what does that really look like on campus? In terms of when you like step into like Gutman Library and walk into class, but like yeah, what are the things that you'll see typically, and like what are some of the conversations that you pick up on when you're there?
Oh, I think it's just a rich environment. I think when I walk into Gutman, right, walking through those doors, it's just exciting in the open space to see students from so many different walks of life, and I think that is so important for not just their growth, but just the overall educational environment at HGSC. As we think about, I've said it a couple of times, the mission of Learn to Change the World is just really having all of these different voices in the space together, navigating complex issues and having robust conversations on topics that they might not always agree on. I think it's that we have a big emphasis on dialogues across differences. That's a component of it. But it's I just find I find a lot of pride in knowing that our population is diverse in just not only number of countries represented, which I think is very important, but also just folks in different walks of life, be that folks coming from rural populations, urban populations, folks coming from different sectors, which is very important, and allows for that cross-sectoral learning. It allows when there's conversations happening for folks to look at it from a different lens and to share their lived experience. And I think there's a big emphasis on folks bringing in their lived experience into the classroom or even outside the classroom in those conversations that can help. Like, it's not to change people's perspectives or so, but to give people some additional tools in their toolkit as they're navigating different topics. So I think it's just so powerful to see that. I love the fact that we have a very, very diverse community. And like I said, it's just in so many different facets. It's just exciting when I walk in the door and I see the students just like hugging each other and just like or just like studying and stuff like that. I mean, Scott, you've seen it firsthand. You've seen it when you've been on campus. Um, uh, I mean, we call it HGSE. They call it Hugsy Hugsy as a hug.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that about the culture the learning environment at HGSE, because it really resonated with so many of like my core values in terms of what, like, the kind of individuals that I, really respect, and also that I strive to be myself, right? Someone who is approachable, someone who is caring, someone who is passionate, someone who puts in the hard work, right, to realize change in our immediate environment and beyond. And yeah, I felt that when talking with a lot of the students, faculty, staff at HGSE, because it's very evident that people are coming at the work of education from different backgrounds, and they don't shy away from speaking about where they came from, and also what they're aiming towards. And even they're still like kind of working out what that even means, myself included. It's very evident that they've put in that work to really reflect on, like, what are the kind of major things that I've experienced and that I've worked on, and like kind of connecting the dots and like seeing a certain pattern towards a certain direction. And so I'm just curious, because when you have an environment like that, I find that one of the words that comes to my mind in terms of like, so like all these people are talking and they're learning from each other, but like what's really taking place, I find it's passion, right? And I think that the word passion is very, very important when it comes to us deciding what our like life's purpose is. And I think it's also very important in terms of helping ignite the passion of others. So I'm just curious, because I'd love to hear from you. Like, when you hear the word passion, what does that kind of like conjure up in your head in terms of like the meaning of it? And yeah, so like on a personal level, like what does that mean? And then yeah, and then through your work, what kind of implications does that have on like supporting others and helping them find their passion?
Oh, great question. When I think of the word passion, I think care. I think determination. These are a couple of words that I think that I associate with passion. I think it's for personally, I think about it as like, this is what I'm dedicating myself to. This is something that I I'm going to be fully vested in, because of the fact that I see it as a positive light in either something that I'm doing, or something where I want to go, or where I want to push forward. I see that in our students all the time, which is exciting. Having the privilege of overseeing admissions, and we practice holistic admissions. So when we are evaluating a applicant, we are looking at so many different criterias, and so many different pieces of evidence to determine if this individual is a right fit for the institution, for the work that HSE wants to do, push forward, but also for themselves as well. Do they have the passion for of like wanting to make meaningful change in the field, but also are they doing it for themselves as well? I think we're very cautious to make sure that the students that we are inviting into the community are going to primarily benefit from for themselves from intellectual growth, but also how are they going to help move the work forward? How are they going to impact the field? And sometimes I think that comes back to, when we think about it, is, do they have the passion? Do they have the desire to do that work? And while doing that work, also, are they willing to challenge themselves to, I go back, not change their perspective, but to think outside the box, to hear new voices, to take in. They're going to receive quite a bit of frameworks, a lot of insight from their classes. But are they going to, in those conversations with their classmates, with their faculty, with staff, are they going to be receptive to continuing to grow? And I think that growth is vital.
Yeah, thank you so much, Frank. I really appreciate, like, when I ask you like about passion, it kind of brings up these other words, right, that kind of help color this really loaded word,
Right.
that, yeah, like, so like you said caring and like determination come into play. And yeah, and I think that in terms of the admissions process, really understanding that like alignment of values, and that sense that this is someone who will not only really like benefit themselves, but also from the university side, that they would really be able to like support like, with like the full like resources that a place like Harvard has, so that you can actualize and like be, carry out that really lofty motto. And then even beyond that, just what does Veritas mean? But one thing I also wanted to comment on is that, I think when people think of a place like Harvard, they just think, oh, they're very smart, right? They just, you know, extremely intelligent, right? But like, as an educator, I think about like, what does intelligence means? And I know that, there's many different theories about like multiple intelligences, right? That kind of help to, not have it be so set in one way. But I feel like when we kind of go away from just the kind of academics, like book smart intelligence that often is associated with a lot of these elite universities, I think the spectrum of what does it mean to like understand like who is a passionate person and who is taking actions towards realizing their goals. Because I also think passion as something very, very much very dynamic, right? You have to be in motion. It's not something that you're just static. There's no way to like, like a flame just kind of like stay idle, right? Because it'll just burn out.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's this process of like, constantly adding more to one's flame, and of course having that burn brighter, right? Shine out there. And so yeah, I'm like hearing these different words like caring and determination, and then all within this context of people from different countries, different cultures and traditions. And so I can't help but think that, we're kind of starting to coalesce on some sense of like what global citizenship means. So I'd like to ask, would you say that like global citizenship from your, personal perspective, it overlays on this conversation about passion? And then is there anything else that you'd like to add to that? I'm just curious because it sounds like you've really set the ground for this conversation about what does it mean to be a global citizen at Hugsy, but also beyond.
No, I think yeah. So my direct answer, my first is yes. I think it's a great segment to like thinking about global citizenship and just the role of the individual. I think about it as like expanding who you feel responsible for. And when I think about global citizenship, and I think education is a great segue to that. I think it's easy for us as individuals, as humans, to really think to care or think about our immediate community. So for me, I could say like our students, our staff, the immediate HGSE community. But it's how do we stretch that wider? And I do that through the work of admissions, through financial aid, when I'm thinking about how do I make HGSE more accessible to individuals globally? Like, how do I make this institution accessible? And I think that is one of the responsibility. When I think about global citizenship, I think about, yes, how do we expand that um that circle of that we are bringing in more folks into and granting more folks visibility because of our shared humanity. I think that's one of the big things that I think about, and I think it ties in perfectly to how you're saying about education.
Yeah, I like the word that you use, like responsible, like this feeling of responsibility, for not only those just immediately around us, but then those living in further distant places, and then the word expansion, right? Because again, it's something like very dynamic. It's not meant to be static, and it definitely implies a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I would say also vulnerability. You're kind of having to come at it from a place of like solid ground yourself, to then be able to venture out and really engage others in dialogue, to ask them about their background, to be able to like sit and listen deeply, to take in what they share. And I think that sometimes the challenge, at least I felt this myself, but also with like my students, of this kind of like feeling of like, well, what happens if I expand the circle too quickly? Then it becomes kind of too overwhelming and like disempowering. Then what happens when the circle starts to diminish and become smaller? Then it's kind of very self-centered and just it's just me out
Yeah.
against the world. And so I'm curious, what kind of advice would you have for the listeners out there trying to like make sense of this expansion of their own spheres of influence in their environment? Like, how do you strike the right balance? I mean, I think there's a certain bit of wisdom that I guess I'm trying to get at in terms of like, how do you do this in your own work? Are there specific things that anchor you in terms of like a deeper sense of self that help you to like kind of be able to push that expansion and not have it necessarily kind of go back in reverse? Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I think
Okay.
I think I think it's important for folks to self-reflect. Like really it's
Hmm.
important to take time to really think about what is the work that you're doing and what is the work that you want to do, and kind of do that assessment of like, is what you're currently doing right now, is it making you happy? Is it moving the needle in the way that you want? It's not that you have to only center yourself, but you should prioritize yourself first to make sure that you're prepared to do the work that you want to do. I'm always taking stock of where I'm at as an individual, where I'm at in my career, where I'm at with my personal life, with my friends, family. And then that allows me to just lean into the work that I want to do, and then inviting more, like you said, more folks into that circle. From a professional perspective, I'm always taking stock of like what's going on in the industry, what's going on not only nationally, but globally. And then I'm thinking about HGSE. What is HGSE's role in this? And how are we being, like, if I want to say good global citizens, how are we then intentionally bringing others into the conversation? Be that by rethinking maybe financial aid policies to specific countries that might not have, the applicants from that country might not have the same financial infrastructure as applicants from other more developed countries or so. So it's basically one of my mentors always had shared, take time to reflect every day. And every morning when I wake up, I have my cup of coffee and I reflect on not only what I'm doing that day, but what's going on in Frank's world. How is Frank feeling? And then also then thinking about, all right, what impact today, but in the longer term, does Frank want to do? Am I moving the needle in that space, and how I can be intentional? I think I think it's very important to give oneself grace, but also going back to how you said passion, to, to have those flames, to have those ideas of like what an individual wants to do. And then always taking stock. Are you making positive movement in that direction? And sometimes it could be something small, but I think that allows me to make sure that I'm not like shrinking the circle, but that I'm actually intentionally grounding it and also expanding it, but not just expanding it just to expand it. I want to be intentional with that. And I think that's important. Sometimes folks can be like, you know what, I want to do X, Y, Z, and I'm going to do it really fast. And I'm going to just, and then you don't want to cause any harm. So I think it's how do you do that in a strategic way?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing in the role that reflection has and the intentionality that one should bring to understanding their own embeddedness within society. When I look at what's happening in society, right, there's so much going on. And like, what does it mean to take full stock of the current social and political climate of the world, or just of the US, right? Just kind of get started with our, immediate country itself. But it often kind of leads, I think most people would say it leads them to a certain sense of dread that maybe things have gotten a little bit out of hand, right? Or there's a sense that we're not quite, in this, like we're new territory. How does one cultivate hope that the that we will be able to continue in our work, advancing the mission to cultivate new educators that are going to learn to change the world? Like, I guess, like when it seems like we're in like our darkest times, like what would you say creates hope, or how does one find hope as a global citizen?
That's a great question. Yes, these are some challenging times. We are definitely facing some challenging times. When I think about the field of education, there's a lot going on. But I recently was presenting. I was a guest speaker in a couple of higher education courses at HGSE, and as we were talking about the current federal landscape and some of the challenges, and quite a bit of challenges that not only colleges and universities across the country are facing, but thinking of for I was anchoring this around Harvard University. We know that there's quite a bit of challenges with what's going on at Harvard as well. Is one of the questions that I kept on coming is, where can one find joy in this work? And that's why I appreciate you asking that question, Scott, because I find the joy in the conversations that are happening in the classroom and with the students. By listening to them, by talking to them, or just observing the conversations they're having, and these are the individuals that are really thinking about, yes, we are in some challenging times, but they're the ones that are also thinking about, all right, what is going to be the future of the field of education? What is going to be the future of our country? And they're definitely having these conversations. And I see in those conversations, even though they might be talking about some challenging topics, I see I see the hope in them. I see the spark of like these conversations of like, wait, we are we thinking about XYZ? Should we be thinking about this? And I think it's through those conversations that I think some good things are going to happen. I think yes, we will get through these challenging times, but I see the joy in our students, and then I see the joy within, and not even in our students, by having the privilege to oversee admissions and financial aid. Every admissions cycle, I'm in the field with my team. I am engaging across the country, across the U.S., but also globally. We visit a number of countries throughout the year, and in those information sessions, in those events, talking to folks that are already doing some amazing work, folks that are thinking about the work that they want to do, and how they spark up when they talk about the work that they're doing or the work that they want to do. That is just like, that's rewarding for me, because that's where I find my joy. But that's where I also know that, you know what? There's some talented individuals. I'm looking at you, Scott, that are doing some amazing things, and that we're going to be okay.
Thank you. I needed to hear those words, Frank, about we're going to be okay. And, it's just so, like, I feel more hopeful just listening to you share about you and your team going out into the field, having these conversations, listening to people doing the work, and wanting to then take it to another level, right? Another realm of impact. And just knowing that those conversations are happening is itself a sign of hope. Maybe, right, maybe I'm speaking for myself, we can overcomplicate what that means, not just the hope side of it, but also the joy side of it, and being like, is this really moving the needle in some direction? I often find myself at a loss to quantify something like that in terms of like, it's a progress meter of like, we'll finally hit a certain threshold. But I do think that, the more and more we can kind of, connect with individuals who are passionate, with individuals and communities who are striving towards a more peaceful, more harmonious environment, we'll start to see this larger change later down the line. I find that it's one thing, right, to like really understand the current society, and of course it's all too easy to identify the bad, or
Yes.
like, this is broken, or this needs to be addressed and fixed, and all this stuff. But I think, a lot of the work that I find myself doing, and also what attracted me to a place like Hugsy, was this other realm of like kind of higher ideals of like, this is where we need to get to. And from what I understand, like from what you've shared, education is that bridge, is that vital piece that we need, or like that engine to help us really imagine new possibilities, like, right, new futures. Would you agree in terms
You
of
said
like
it.
education's role in
Yeah,
that?
you said it beautifully. It is vital. I think it is the main tool that'll continue moving us in the right direction. And I think, like, one thing I wanted to highlight that you said, that I think it's so easy to lean into the negative sound bites. Yes, we don't want to minimize the some of the horrible policies or horrible things that are occurring, but there's a lot of great things that are happening, and I think the negative tends to take most of the dominate most of the conversation, when we also need to start leaning into one of the great things that are happening across the country, but around the globe, not only in the field of education, but in other sectors as well.
I totally agree. And, I just really like hearing more of your story, Frank, and just feeling your passion for the work that you're doing. It gives me a lot of hope that Hugsy will continue to admit students who have this passion and this vision of global citizenship to make positive impact, and that they will thoroughly enjoy their time at Hugsy and then go out into the world and do even more incredible work. I'm really happy that we have this opportunity to speak more about the role of education, college access, and just I think again like this larger conversation around like what is passion and how do we affect positive change in our community. I think this is an important conversation that we need to be having in the times that we're living in. So I just have one more question to ask you. Any book recommendations, movie recommendations, or just generally, what would you like to share with the listeners?
Well, first, Scott, thank you for having this conversation. I think you're doing such amazing work and like really making sure that folks are hearing some of the stuff that's going on. So appreciate that. Reading a couple of things. One that I would recommend that I'm currently reading is Educated by Tara Westover. So that's Educated by Tara Westover. And I think it's a read about not only a woman's journey or the struggles through navigating and fighting her way through higher education, but if you take a step back and through a wider lens, it's really about how she navigated different systems. Like we're talking about geography, ideology, family, access, and these are all topics that transcend um, zip code country. So I would recommend that book. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. It was recommended to me by a colleague.
Thank you so much for that book recommendation. I'll definitely check it out myself. And just wanted to give you the last word. So, any final thoughts or send offs as we wrap up this wonderful conversation?
Yes, I just want to say that colleges and universities across the country are doing some great work. I do feel that education personally is under attack, but I think there's a lot of great voices out there to show the meaningful work that the education field and educators are doing on a daily basis. And I'm just excited for opportunities like this to elevate the great work that's going on by many folks, not only across the country, but globally, as we continue to make education accessible for all. Like I said earlier, I think it's not only a public good, but I think it's a human right because it's the foundation for everything. And like you said, it's that bridge to it's that bridge to joy. Let's call it. Thank you, Scott.